What if everything you thought you knew about the Lion King was just scratching the surface? The colorful monkey we all laughed at as children wasn't just comic relief. He was performing authentic African spiritual rituals right before our eyes. For decades, we've watched Rafiki swing through trees, make strange noises, and wave his staff around. We dismissed him as the eccentric, slightly unhinged baboon who occasionally dispenses wisdom. But what if his seemingly random behaviors actually follow a precise spiritual system with deep cultural significance? Let's consider what we actually see on screen. Rafiki meditates in specific postures. He creates elaborate paintings using natural ingredients with symbolic colors. He communicates with the spirits of the deceased, and he performs ceremonial rituals that directly influence the physical world around him. These aren't random actions invented by Disney animators. They're carefully researched representations of authentic African spiritual practices that have been hiding in plain sight all along. I've spent months analyzing every frame featuring Rafiki across all Lion King films, consulting with experts in African spiritual traditions, and what I've discovered will fundamentally change how you view this character forever. Let's start at the beginning, Rafiki's introduction in the original film. We first see him climbing to the top of Pride Rock for Simba's presentation ceremony, but watch carefully what happens before this. In his tree home, Rafiki sits in meditation, surrounded by gourds and natural objects. He then makes a specific marking on his wall painting. Pause the film at exactly 5:23 and you'll notice something remarkable. The position of his fingers as he applies the red pigment matches precisely the ritual gestures used in several West African traditions when invoking ancestral protection. This isn't coincidence, it's deliberate. Come on, think about it. Why would Disney animators pay such careful attention to these specific hand positions unless they were intentionally replicating authentic practices? The pigments themselves tell another story. The red paint Rafiki uses comes from the fruit he cracks open. In numerous African spiritual traditions, red ochre represents life force and protection. When applied in ceremonial contexts, it's believed to establish a connection between the physical and spiritual realms. What appears to be a simple character-establishing moment is actually showing us a shaman performing the initial stages of a protection ritual. The marking of Simba's forehead later isn't just symbolic. It's the completion of this ritual, applying the protective substance to the subject. Let's face it, we've been watching authentic spiritual practices performed by a trained shaman all along, not just a quirky monkey character. This changes everything when you realize that Rafiki's entire role in the Lion King universe isn't just as a wise advisor. He's the spiritual guardian of the Pride Lands, actively maintaining the balance between the physical and spiritual worlds. His famous chant, Asante Sana Squash Banana, which seems like nonsensical singing, it's a distraction technique. While we focus on the silly words, we miss that the rhythm and cadence match traditional chanting patterns used to enter altered states of consciousness in various African spiritual traditions. When Rafiki sits cross-legged with his staff balanced perfectly, he's not just being eccentric. He's entering a meditative state that, in many traditions, allows spiritual practitioners to receive visions and connect with the ancestral realm. The positioning of his staff, often overlooked, follows specific patterns seen in ritual objects from several African cultures. What if I told you there was an entire system of magic being performed throughout these films? One that follows consistent internal rules and draws from authentic cultural practices? The evidence becomes even more compelling when you analyze the famous presentation ceremony at Pride Rock. What most viewers see as a simple showing the baby to the kingdom moment is actually layered with spiritual significance that follows precise ritualistic patterns. First, notice how Rafiki approaches Simba. He doesn't simply pick him up, he performs specific movements with his staff first, creating a protected space around the cub. This mirrors purification rituals performed before important ceremonies in various African traditions. The application of the fruit juice mark isn't random either. The specific pattern he draws on Simba's forehead resembles traditional markings used in coming-of-age ceremonies across several African cultures. These markings are believed to connect the individual to their ancestral lineage and spiritual destiny. Then there's the sprinkling of dust or sand over Simba. In numerous African spiritual traditions, certain sands and soils are considered to have sacred properties, often used to establish connections between the earthly realm and the spirit world. When you really pay attention, it becomes impossible to unsee. Every movement Rafiki makes follows specific patterns, consistent with authentic ritual practices. From the way he holds Simba to the precise moment he presents him to the gathered animals. The most telling detail comes at the exact moment of presentation. As Rafiki raises Simba, the clouds part and a single beam of sunlight illuminates the cub. We're meant to believe this is just dramatic cinematic effect, but what if it's actually showing us the result of Rafiki's ritual? The physical manifestation of spiritual forces he's invoked through his ceremonial actions. In many African spiritual systems, natural phenomena like sudden weather changes are considered direct responses from the spiritual realm. The sunbeam isn't just beautiful animation. It's showing us that Rafiki's ritual was successful in connecting Simba to his spiritual lineage and destiny. Honestly, Disney's animators didn't need to include these specific details. They could have created a much simpler presentation scene. The fact that they chose to include these precise elements, movements, and results suggests a deliberate effort to portray authentic spiritual practices. But this is just scratching the surface. The presentation ceremony is merely the first of numerous rituals Rafiki performs throughout the films, each more complex and spiritually significant than the last. What happens when we apply this same level of analysis to Rafiki's most mysterious scenes? Like when he somehow knows Simba is alive years later? Or when he guides Simba to communicate with Mufasa's spirit? Or his seemingly magical ability to influence the weather and natural elements? I believe Rafiki isn't just performing simplified or Disney-fied versions of spiritual practices. He's executing complex rituals drawn from authentic traditions. Rituals that have specific purposes, components, and outcomes within the spiritual system of the Pride Lands. As we continue, I'll reveal the hidden dimensions of Rafiki's most iconic scenes, decode the authentic spiritual practices they're based on, and uncover the complete magical system operating beneath the surface of the Lion King universe. What if the wise baboon we've been laughing at for decades is actually performing some of the most authentic representations of African spirituality ever depicted in mainstream Western media? To fully understand the depth of Rafiki's spiritual practices, we need to examine his character more closely across all Lion King films. Disney didn't just create a random wise character, they crafted a fully realized shaman with consistent abilities and practices. The evidence of Disney's research is hidden in plain sight. In the early 1990s, Disney sent teams to Africa to study the landscape, wildlife, and cultures that would inform the Lion King. This wasn't just about getting the animals right, it extended to cultural elements as well. Rafiki is specifically identified as a mandrill, but his role in the Pride Lands ecosystem transcends his species. He exists outside the predator-prey relationship that defines other characters. Instead, he operates as a mediator between the physical and spiritual realms, exactly the role shamans play in many African traditions. Let's examine his living space. Rafiki resides in a massive baobab tree, which is far from a random choice. In numerous African spiritual traditions, baobab trees are considered sacred spaces where the physical and spiritual worlds intersect. They're often used as gathering places for rituals and ceremonies. The interior of Rafiki's tree home reveals even more. The walls are covered with paintings that record the lineage and significant events of the Pride Lands. This mirrors the role of oral historians and knowledge keepers in many African cultures, who preserve community history through art and storytelling. What if these aren't just cute paintings, but actual ritual objects with spiritual power? Notice how Rafiki interacts with these images. He doesn't just look at them, he communes with them. When he learns Simba is alive, he adds to the painting in specific ways that activate it, not just update it. His famous staff isn't just a walking stick. Its design, topped with gourds that rattle when shaken, directly resembles ritual implements used by spiritual practitioners across various African traditions. These instruments aren't decorative. They serve specific functions in ceremonies. The rattling sound produced by these gourds isn't random noise. In many traditions, rhythmic sounds are used to facilitate transitions between ordinary and non-ordinary states of consciousness, essential for communicating with the spirit world. Honestly, have you ever questioned why Rafiki knows so much? How does he know exactly when Simba returns to the Pride Lands? How can he commune with Mufasa's spirit? These abilities aren't random magical powers. They follow specific patterns consistent with traditional shamanic practices. In many African spiritual systems, shamans don't just have innate magical abilities. They develop specific skills through training and initiation, including divination, reading signs to gather information, mediumship, communicating with spirits, and healing. Look at how consistently Rafiki demonstrates these exact abilities throughout the films. He reads natural signs to locate Simba. He facilitates communication with Mufasa's spirit. He heals emotional wounds through specific ritual processes. These aren't random superpowers, they're consistent shamanic abilities. The most overlooked aspect of Rafiki's character is his relationship with time. Notice how he seems to know events before they happen and can interpret past events with perfect clarity. This non-linear relationship with time is a fundamental aspect of many African spiritual cosmologies. In these traditions, time isn't strictly linear but cyclical and permeable. Properly trained practitioners can access knowledge across time through specific ritual practices, exactly what we see Rafiki doing throughout the films. Let's face it, Disney didn't need to include these specific details. They could have made Rafiki a simple, wise character without all these consistent spiritual elements. The fact that his abilities and practices form a coherent system suggests intentional design based on research. This changes everything. When you realize Disney created one of the most authentic representations of an African spiritual practitioner ever featured in mainstream Western media, hidden in plain sight as a colorful baboon character in a children's film, The Lion King 2 provides even more evidence of Rafiki's role as a spiritual practitioner. When he discovers that Kiara and Kovu are destined to be together, he doesn't just guess. He performs a specific divination ritual. He places objects representing each cub on his tortoiseshell and observes how they move together. This directly parallels divination practices found in various African traditions, where practitioners use sacred objects to reveal hidden knowledge about relationships, future events, or cosmic plans. The specific technique Rafiki uses resembles shell divination methods practiced in several cultures. Come on, watch that scene again with this knowledge. The careful placement of the objects, the interpretation of their movements, the revelation of knowledge that couldn't be obtained through ordinary means. This is authentic divination practice translated into animation. Rafiki's healing abilities follow similar patterns of authenticity. When he treats Simba's emotional wounds in the original film, he doesn't just offer advice, he performs a specific healing ritual. First, he creates a protected ritual space through his movements and chanting. Then he uses physical actions, the bonk on the head, that serve as pattern interruptions, techniques used in many healing traditions to disrupt negative thought patterns. Finally, he guides Simba through a specific process of reconnection with his ancestral wisdom. These aren't random actions but components of genuine healing practices found across various African spiritual systems. The physical, emotional, and spiritual dimensions are addressed simultaneously, exactly as traditional healing rituals would approach such wounds. What happens when we consider Rafiki's famous Asante Sana chant with this knowledge? The rhythmic pattern, the repetition, the seemingly nonsensical words that mask a deeper meaning. These are classic elements of trance-inducing chants used in numerous traditions. The phrase Asante Sana squash banana seems like gibberish to most viewers. But Asante Sana actually means thank you very much in Swahili. The apparently random fruits mentioned afterward create a rhythmic pattern that helps establish the altered state necessary for spiritual work. When Rafiki performs this chant, he's not just being eccentric, he's preparing himself for spiritual work by entering a specific state of consciousness. Notice how these chanting sequences often precede his most significant spiritual insights or actions. Let's look at the physical movements that accompany his chanting. The swaying, the specific gestures, the integrated movement of his staff. These aren't random animations, but precise ritual movements that serve specific functions in establishing the proper state for spiritual work. What if every seemingly random aspect of Rafiki's behavior actually follows specific ritual patterns? His laughter, his sudden appearances and disappearances, his seemingly erratic movements? What if these are all components of a comprehensive spiritual practice? In many traditions, trickster elements are intentionally incorporated into spiritual practices. The unexpected and seemingly chaotic serves to disrupt ordinary thinking and facilitate transitions between different states of consciousness. Rafiki's unpredictable behaviors may serve exactly this function. This becomes particularly evident when examining how other characters perceive him. They consistently describe him as crazy or weird, exactly how non-initiates often perceive spiritual practitioners whose behaviors don't conform to ordinary social patterns. But notice how characters who experience Rafiki's guidance firsthand, like Simba, ultimately recognize the wisdom beneath the seemingly erratic exterior. This mirrors the journey of understanding that occurs when people directly experience authentic spiritual practices rather than observing them from outside. Let's talk about the fruit juice Rafiki uses in his rituals. The distinctive red color and the fruit's appearance resemble the juice of the African mangosteen, or similar fruits used in various traditional practices. These natural substances aren't just symbolic. They're believed to have specific properties that facilitate connections with the spirit world. The manner in which Rafiki cracks open the fruit and applies it follows patterns seen in actual ceremonial applications of sacred substances. The precise finger positions, the careful collection of the juice, the specific patterns applied. These details reflect authentic practices rather than invented animations. When Rafiki applies these substances in rituals, the results are immediate and tangible within the film's universe. Weather changes, animals gather, spirits appear. The film presents these as direct results of his ritual actions, exactly as traditional beliefs would understand the efficacy of properly performed ceremonies. What about Rafiki's ability to communicate with Mufasa's spirit? This isn't presented as a general magical ability, but as a specific skill that requires proper preparation, ritual space, and procedural knowledge. Exactly how mediumship functions in traditional spiritual systems. When Rafiki guides Simba to commune with Mufasa's spirit, he doesn't do it directly. Instead, he leads Simba through a specific process that enables his own connection. This mirrors how spiritual practitioners in many traditions serve as facilitators rather than intermediaries, teaching others to access spiritual dimensions themselves. But the most compelling evidence comes from examining the consistency of Rafiki's practices across all Lion King films. Despite different directors and decades between productions, his spiritual abilities and ritual methods remain remarkably consistent, suggesting they're based on a specific researched system rather than arbitrary magical powers. What deeper mysteries will we uncover when we analyze Rafiki's most significant rituals in detail? What hidden dimensions of African spirituality did Disney incorporate into these beloved films? Now that we've established Rafiki's role as a spiritual practitioner, let's examine specific ritual sequences that reveal the depth of authentic practices hidden in The Lion King. These aren't random magical moments. They're carefully choreographed rituals with distinct components that mirror genuine African spiritual traditions. Ritual Juk 1. The Presentation Ceremony. Let's break down this iconic scene frame by frame. The ceremony begins with Rafiki's approach to the royal family. Notice how he walks with his staff in a specific position, parallel to the ground, held with both hands. This posture appears in numerous West African ceremonial processions, particularly those involving the presentation of royalty. Before touching Simba, Rafiki performs a blessing using natural elements. He breaks open a fruit, collects its juice, and applies it in a specific pattern on Simba's forehead. The pattern isn't random. It resembles protective markings used in coming-of-age ceremonies across several cultures in East Africa. What happens next is far more significant than most viewers realize. The dust Rafiki sprinkles over Simba contains specific ritual components. If you pause at exactly 9:17 in the original film, you can see it's not just dust, but a mixture of substances with different colors. This mirrors the use of sacred compounds in blessing ceremonies from various traditions. The actual presentation follows a precise ritual structure. Elevation, raising Simba. Presentation, turning to face the assembled animals. And acknowledgement, the animals bowing. This three-part ceremony directly parallels traditional royal presentations in several African kingdoms. Most tellingly, the natural elements respond to this ritual. The clouds part, sunlight shines down, and the wind picks up at specific moments corresponding to Rafiki's actions. In many African spiritual systems, such natural responses indicate the ancestors' approval of the ceremony. Ritual number 2, the shamanic location trance. When Rafiki needs to determine if Simba is alive years later, he doesn't just guess. He performs a specific divination ritual. This sequence reveals one of the most authentic representations of shamanic practices in the film. First, he creates a sacred space within his baobab tree. The arrangement of gourds, bones, and fruits around him isn't decorative. It establishes a ritual perimeter that helps focus spiritual energies. This practice appears in numerous traditions where practitioners create specific environmental conditions for divination work. Notice his posture during this sequence, seated with spine straight, eyes partially closed, breath regulated. These are classic trance induction techniques found across various spiritual traditions. They prepare the practitioner to receive information not accessible through ordinary consciousness. The most overlooked detail in this scene comes at exactly 46:22. Rafiki's fingers move in specific patterns that match traditional mudras, sacred hand positions, used in various African and Indian spiritual practices to facilitate altered states of consciousness. Disney animators didn't need this level of detail. They included it intentionally. When Rafiki receives the knowledge that Simba is alive, it doesn't come as a vague feeling but through specific sensory inputs. The smell carried on the wind, the pattern of dust in the air. This mirrors how many traditional practitioners describe receiving information during divination, through heightened sensory awareness rather than abstract thought. His response to this knowledge is equally ritualistic. He doesn't simply update his painting of Simba, he performs a specific activation ritual. The application of the red pigment completes a spiritual circuit that connects the representation to the living being. Let's face it, this is far more than a cute character moment. It's a remarkably accurate depiction of divination practices found in numerous traditional spiritual systems. Ritual the Number 3. The Healing Ritual. When Rafiki finds Simba in the jungle, their interaction isn't just a pep talk. It's a structured healing ritual with distinct components that mirror traditional practices. The ritual begins with an encounter phase where Rafiki disrupts Simba's ordinary consciousness through unexpected behaviors, singing, disappearing, reappearing. These aren't random antics, but classic pattern interruptions used in many healing traditions to make the subject receptive to transformation. Have you ever noticed that Rafiki's famous bonk on Simba's head isn't random slapstick? It occurs at a specific moment in their interaction and serves a precise function, shocking Simba out of his established thought patterns. This mirrors techniques used in various traditional healing systems, where physical stimuli are applied to disrupt negative mental cycles. The central component of this healing ritual involves guiding Simba to water, a universal symbol of transformation and rebirth. The reflected images Rafiki shows him aren't just visual aids. They're tools for facilitating a specific type of self-recognition that appears in numerous traditional healing methodologies. Rafiki's guidance follows the classic shamanic healing structure: disruption of harmful patterns, presentation of alternative perspectives, and reconnection with sources of strength, in this case, Mufasa's spiritual presence. Come on, no one puts this much specific structure into a random scene. This follows authentic healing methodologies too precisely to be coincidental. Ritual number 4, the spirit communication sequence. Perhaps the most powerful evidence comes from the Remember Who You Are sequence. This isn't just an emotional climax. It's a meticulous depiction of spirit communication rituals found across numerous African traditions. This changes everything. When you realize this famous scene follows the exact structure of traditional spirit mediation ceremonies, where a trained practitioner facilitates communication between the living and ancestral spirits. The sequence begins with Rafiki establishing the proper conditions. Notice how he doesn't immediately take Simba to communicate with Mufasa. First, he creates the right mindset through specific questions and statements that prepare Simba for the experience. The location isn't random either. He leads Simba to a specific kind of pond in a particular environment, a still water body surrounded by particular vegetation. Such places are considered liminal spaces, thresholds between worlds, in many traditions, ideal for spirit communication. What if those seemingly random words Rafiki speaks aren't nonsense, but actual ritual invocations? Look down there isn't just directing Simba's attention, it's establishing the reflective surface as a portal, a practice found in numerous divination traditions that use mirrors or water for spirit contact. The specific instruction to look harder isn't just encouragement. It's a trance induction technique. In many traditions, fixed-point gazing at reflective surfaces is used to shift consciousness to a receptive state for spirit communication. When Mufasa's image appears, note that it doesn't happen randomly. It occurs following specific words and gestures from Rafiki, who then steps back. This mirrors the role of the mediator in traditional spirit communication, who facilitates the connection but doesn't interfere with the actual communion. What happens in the sky afterward isn't just dramatic animation. The specific way the clouds form, the particular pattern of Mufasa's appearance, and the progression of the interaction all follow patterns consistent with how spirit manifestations are described in traditional accounts of successful ceremonial communications. Most tellingly, a Rafiki is absent during the actual spirit communication. In many traditions, the practitioner's role is to prepare the space and the participant, then step aside for the direct communion to occur. This is exactly what we see. Further evidence that Disney researched authentic practices rather than inventing magical moments. Ritual number 5, the royal blessing and succession. The final ritual we see Rafiki perform in the original film occurs after Simba reclaims the throne. This isn't just a happy ending sequence, it's a specific blessing and succession ritual that completes the spiritual cycle begun with the presentation ceremony. First, observe Rafiki's approach to the victorious Simba. His posture, the position of his staff, and his movements all mirror his approach in the opening ceremony, creating ritual continuity that's fundamental to many traditional practices. The embrace between Rafiki and Simba isn't just emotional, it's ceremonial. Notice how Rafiki positions his hands on specific points of Simba's body in a way that resembles traditional blessing postures from several African cultures. What if the whispered words we don't hear are actually a specific blessing formula? The length, Rafiki's mouth movements, and Simba's response all suggest a formal ritual communication rather than casual congratulations. The ascension to Pride Rock follows specific ceremonial movements. The pace, the pauses at particular points, the final presentation posture. These aren't just dramatic choices, but reflect traditional royal installation ceremonies from various African kingdoms. The culminating roar and response from the assembled animals completes a ritual circuit. Call and response patterns that finalize ceremonial transitions in numerous traditions. What about Rafiki's rituals in the sequels and The Lion King 1-1-2? In The Lion King 2, Rafiki performs a divination ritual to discover Kiara and Kovu's shared destiny. The specific method, using a tortoise shell as a divination board and representative objects for the individuals, directly parallels divination methods used in several African traditions. The matching of gourds, the movement of representative objects toward each other, and Rafiki's interpretation all follow authentic practices. These aren't just cute visual moments. They're remarkably accurate representations of traditional divination techniques. Honestly, there's too much specific detail for this to be coincidental. When you see how consistently these patterns appear across multiple films by different creative teams, it becomes clear that Rafiki's character was built on researched spiritual practices rather than arbitrary magical abilities. In The Lion King 1-1-2, we get additional insights into Rafiki's abilities. His tracking of Simba through meditation, his response to environmental signs, and his recognition of cosmic patterns all align with traditional shamanic practices focused on reading natural omens. Most significantly, this film shows him actively selecting Simba's future queen through a specific divination process, extending his role beyond advisor to active participant in maintaining the cosmic order of the Pride Lands. What if every single one of Rafiki's magical moments actually follows specific ritual patterns from authentic African spiritual traditions? What if, hidden beneath the colorful animation and entertaining character, Disney included one of the most authentic portrayals of African spirituality ever featured in Western mainstream media? The evidence is overwhelming. The specific movements, the consistent ritual structures, the precise use of natural elements, the accurate portrayal of trance states and spirit communication, these details are too numerous and too precise to be coincidental. But the significance of these discoveries extends far beyond interesting trivia. If Rafiki is performing authentic spiritual practices, it fundamentally changes our understanding of the entire Lion King universe and the forces that operate within it. What unseen dimensions of this spiritual system might explain other mysterious elements of the films? How does Rafiki's role as spiritual practitioner affect our understanding of the Pride Lands' cosmic order? We've established that Rafiki performs authentic spiritual rituals throughout the Lion King films, but the implications extend far beyond one character. What if Rafiki's practices reveal an entire spiritual ecosystem operating beneath the surface of the Pride Lands, one that connects and influences every major character and event? Let's consider the most profound spiritual event in the films, Mufasa's appearances from beyond. These aren't simply dramatic moments, they're the direct result of Rafiki's spiritual work. What appears to happen spontaneously actually requires careful ritual preparation that we see Rafiki performing throughout the films. Notice that Mufasa's spirit never appears randomly. Each manifestation follows specific patterns. They occur at pivotal moments of transition, they happen in particular environments, often involving water or sky, and they're always preceded by Rafiki's direct or indirect involvement. The famous "Remember Who You Are" scene doesn't occur spontaneously. It happens only after Rafiki performs specific preparatory rituals, creates the proper conditions, and guides Simba to the correct physical and mental state. Without these preparations, the spirit communication couldn't occur. What if Rafiki isn't just facilitating these spiritual connections, but actively maintaining the entire cosmic order of the Pride Lands? Look carefully at the environmental changes that occur throughout the films. The Pride Lands flourish under Mufasa, deteriorate under Scar, and revive under Simba. These aren't just symbolic changes. They're presented as direct responses to the spiritual balance of the kingdom. In many African spiritual systems, the physical health of the land is intimately connected to proper spiritual maintenance through ritual. The ruler isn't just a political leader but a spiritual conduit whose right relationship with ancestral forces directly affects the prosperity of the community. Have you ever noticed that the Pride Lands transformation after Simba's return isn't gradual but immediate? This sudden revival doesn't make ecological sense, but it makes perfect ritual sense. The proper spiritual order has been restored through Rafiki's ceremonial work and Simba's rightful succession. This changes everything when you realize the entire circle of life concept presented in the films isn't just philosophical. It's a representation of a spiritual ecosystem that Rafiki actively maintains through his ritual practices. The opening song isn't just a beautiful introduction. It's describing an actual spiritual system with specific rules and relationships. The circle of life is the westernized name for a traditional African cosmological concept that appears in various forms across multiple cultures. Within this system, Rafiki serves as the mediator who ensures proper flow of spiritual forces through ritual maintenance. His ceremonies aren't just important moments, they're essential maintenance of the cosmic order that sustains the Pride Lands. Let's examine how other characters unknowingly participate in this spiritual system. Simba isn't just receiving wisdom from Rafiki, he's being initiated into specific spiritual knowledge. His journey follows the classic initiation pattern found in numerous traditions: separation, leaving the Pride Lands; liminality, life in the jungle; and reincorporation, return as king. This isn't just a hero's journey narrative. It's a specific spiritual initiation structure that prepares Simba to serve as the proper conduit between the ancestral realm and the physical world of the Pride Lands. What if Mufasa wasn't just teaching Simba to be a king, but preparing him for this spiritual role? Their famous "everything the light touches" scene isn't just about territorial boundaries. It's about spiritual responsibility for maintaining cosmic balance. Mufasa's explanation of the stars as the great kings of the past looking down on us isn't just a comforting metaphor. It's describing an actual ancestral presence within the film's spiritual system. The continued influence of past rulers on the present is a fundamental concept in many African spiritual traditions. Come on, look at how precisely this aligns with traditional beliefs about ancestral spirits. The ongoing involvement of deceased leaders, their ability to provide guidance in times of crisis, the necessity of proper ritual to maintain these connections. These are authentic spiritual concepts translated into animated form. Even Scar's reign reveals the importance of this spiritual system. His rule isn't just politically oppressive, it's spiritually illegitimate. He hasn't undergone the proper ceremonies, doesn't maintain ritual connections with ancestral forces, and disrupts the spiritual balance of the Pride Lands. The physical deterioration of the kingdom under Scar isn't just symbolic. It's the direct result of broken spiritual protocols. This mirrors beliefs in many traditional systems where improper succession or failure to maintain ritual obligations leads to physical disaster for the community. What about the hyenas? Their exclusion from the Pride Lands isn't just about resource management, it represents a spiritual imbalance. Their excessive presence during Scar's reign isn't just a political alliance, but a manifestation of cosmic disorder. In many traditional African spiritual systems, proper balance requires each element to remain in its correct relationship to the whole. The hyena's appropriate presence at the periphery versus their domination under Scar reflects this concept of spiritual equilibrium. Let's face it, even the humor in the films contains spiritual dimensions. Timon and Pumbaa's Hakuna Matata philosophy isn't just carefree living, it represents a specific type of spiritual imbalance through detachment from community and responsibility. Their isolated existence outside the Pride Lands isn't just geographical, it's spiritually disconnected. Their lifestyle represents what happens when individuals separate themselves from the proper cosmic order, maintained through community and ritual. Simba's time with them isn't just a break from responsibility. It's a spiritual dead end that Rafiki must correct through specific ritual interventions. His tracking and healing of Simba isn't just about bringing back the rightful king, it's about restoring a crucial element to the spiritual ecosystem. What if Nala's appearance in the jungle isn't just coincidence but part of this spiritual design? Her arrival serves as a catalyst in Simba's spiritual journey, appearing at precisely the right moment to facilitate his return to the proper path. In many traditional spiritual systems, apparently random encounters are understood as orchestrated by ancestral forces, guiding individuals toward their proper destiny. Nala's tracking of Simba fits this pattern of spiritually significant coincidence. The most overlooked spiritual dimension appears in The Lion King 2 with the introduction of the Outsiders. Their separation from the Pride Lands isn't just political, it's a spiritual fracture that threatens the cosmic balance Rafiki works to maintain. Zira's obsession with Scar isn't just loyalty, it's spiritual devotion to an illegitimate source of power. Her training of Kovu isn't just preparation for revenge, it's a dark initiation that mirrors but distorts the proper spiritual preparation Simba received. What if Kiara and Kovu's relationship isn't just a Romeo and Juliet story, but a necessary spiritual reconciliation? Notice how Rafiki doesn't just observe their connection. He actively facilitates it through specific divination and blessing rituals. Their union isn't just political peacemaking, it's spiritual healing of a fractured cosmic order. This mirrors traditional concepts of community health, requiring proper relationships between all elements of society, often facilitated through ritually blessed unions. Honestly, the entire plot of The Lion King 2 is built around spiritual concepts. The reconciliation of divided groups, the importance of proper succession, the danger of devotion to illegitimate power sources, these are all traditional spiritual concerns translated into narrative form. Most tellingly, Rafiki's role in this sequel isn't diminished but expanded. His ritual interventions become even more explicit, from the divination of Kiara and Kovu's shared destiny to his guidance of their relationship through specific spiritual practices. What if Rafiki isn't just maintaining the spiritual balance but actively guiding its evolution? His facilitation of union between former enemies represents a development of the spiritual ecosystem, adapting traditional practices to address new challenges. This adaptability mirrors how actual spiritual traditions function, maintaining core principles while evolving specific practices to address changing circumstances. Rafiki isn't just preserving an ancient system but helping it grow and heal. The most profound revelation comes when we examine who Rafiki interacts with most directly. Throughout all the films, he maintains constant communication with Mufasa's spirit. This isn't just occasional connection, it's ongoing consultation that guides his actions. In many traditional African spiritual systems, senior practitioners maintain regular communication with specific ancestral spirits who serve as guides and sources of wisdom. Rafiki's relationship with Mufasa's spirit directly mirrors this practice. Notice how Rafiki often appears to know things he couldn't possibly know through ordinary means. Simba's location, Kiara and Kovu's destiny, the right moment for specific interventions. These aren't random magical powers, but the result of this ongoing spiritual consultation. What happens when we view the entire Lion King narrative through this spiritual lens? The succession of rulers isn't just political drama. It's the maintenance of a cosmic channel between the ancestral realm and the physical world. Proper succession, maintained through correct ritual, ensures the health of the entire ecosystem. This concept appears in numerous African spiritual traditions, where leadership isn't just governance, but stewardship of cosmic forces that affect everything from rainfall to fertility to community harmony. The ruler serves as a conduit for these forces, not just a political authority. The most mind-blowing realization comes when we consider what Rafiki might actually be training Simba for. What if the famous Remember Who You Are sequence isn't just about reclaiming political power, but about preparing Simba to eventually take on Rafiki's role as spiritual guardian? Look at the progression across films. Rafiki initially performs rituals for Simba, then guides Simba to perform aspects of rituals himself, and finally observes as Simba demonstrates growing spiritual awareness. This mirrors traditional apprenticeship patterns in many spiritual systems. What if the true circle of life includes the eventual succession of spiritual guardians as well as kings? Just as Mufasa prepared Simba for kingship, Rafiki may be preparing him for eventual spiritual guardianship of the Pride Lands. This would explain why Rafiki seems increasingly satisfied with observing rather than intervening as the films progress. He's witnessing his students' growing spiritual capacity, exactly as a mentor would in traditional apprenticeship systems. But this revelation raises profound questions about the entire Lion King universe. If Rafiki is training Simba in spiritual guardianship, who trained Rafiki? How long has this system been maintained in the Pride Lands? What deeper spiritual forces might operate beyond even what we've seen? What unseen dimensions of this spiritual system might explain the most mysterious aspects of the films? How does understanding this hidden spiritual web transform our perception of the stories we thought we knew? Understanding Rafiki's role as a legitimate spiritual practitioner performing authentic rituals fundamentally transforms how we view the entire Lion King universe. These aren't just children's films with talking animals. They're sophisticated representations of traditional African spiritual systems encoded within accessible storytelling. What real-world traditions might have inspired Disney's portrayal of Rafiki? The evidence points to several specific African spiritual practices that appear to have influenced his character and rituals. Rafiki's divination methods, particularly his use of gourds, fruits, and painted images, bear striking similarities to practices found in various West African traditions, including elements of Yoruba divination systems. The specific finger positions, the interpretation of natural signs, and the ceremonial applications of pigments all have parallels in these traditions. His role as mediator between the living and ancestral realms mirrors the function of spiritual practitioners in numerous African cultures, from the Sangomas of southern Africa to various West African traditional priest roles. These practitioners serve as essential community figures who maintain cosmic balance through ritual maintenance. The specific trance induction techniques Rafiki employs, rhythmic chanting, specific postures, specialized breathing, align with methods documented across various African spiritual traditions. These aren't generic magical elements, but specific techniques developed over centuries for facilitating altered states of consciousness. Let's face it, Disney didn't invent these elements. They drew from authentic practices and translated them into accessible animated sequences that viewers of all backgrounds could appreciate without fully understanding their spiritual significance. What's remarkable is how accurately they portrayed these practices, despite the constraints of animation and the need to create family-friendly content. The specific hand positions, the precise ritual sequences, the correct use of natural elements. These details reveal careful research rather than invented spirituality. Come on, think about when these films were made. The original Lion King was released in 1994, long before Western popular culture had widespread access to information about traditional African spiritual practices. Disney's research team went far beyond what was necessary to create a convincing character. This raises profound questions about intention. Why would Disney include such specific, accurate representations of traditional spiritual practices in films primarily marketed to children? What message were they embedding beneath the surface of these beloved stories? This changes everything. When you realize Disney may have been deliberately preserving and honoring traditional African spiritual wisdom through Rafiki's character. Rather than appropriating or simplifying these traditions, they encoded authentic practices within a character who appears eccentric on the surface but performs legitimate spiritual work when viewed with informed eyes. Consider the historical context. These films were created during a period when indigenous spiritual traditions were still widely misunderstood and often dismissed by Western audiences. By embedding authentic practices within a beloved character, Disney created a vehicle for these traditions to reach global audiences who might otherwise never encounter them. More profoundly, they presented these spiritual practices as effective within the film's universe. Rafiki's rituals work. They produce tangible results, facilitate communication with ancestors, heal spiritual wounds, and maintain cosmic balance. This isn't just representation. It's affirmation of the legitimacy of these practices on their own terms. What does this reveal about Disney's approach to cultural material? Far from the superficial cultural borrowing they're sometimes accused of, the evidence suggests deep research and intentional preservation of spiritual knowledge through accessible storytelling. This hidden dimension transforms how we should view not just Rafiki but the entire spiritual ecosystem of the Pride Lands. The circle of life isn't just a catchy phrase, but a simplified description of a complex spiritual cosmology that governs the film's universe. The succession of kings, the balance between species, the connection between rulers and the land's prosperity, these elements reflect authentic African spiritual concepts regarding proper cosmic order maintained through correct ritual and legitimate leadership. What if Disney was doing more than entertaining us? What if they were preserving and transmitting traditional wisdom through the vehicle of popular entertainment, encoding spiritual knowledge in a form that could reach audiences worldwide? This possibility transforms how we should approach these films. They're not just entertainment, but potential repositories of traditional knowledge presented in accessible form. The eccentric baboon might actually be one of the most authentic representations of African spiritual practice ever to reach global audiences. Honestly, it's mind-blowing to consider what this means for how we watch these films. Every scene featuring Rafiki contains layers of meaning that most viewers have never recognized. His apparently random behaviors are actually precise spiritual techniques with specific purposes and effects. The implications extend beyond The Lion King to how we approach other Disney films. What other authentic cultural elements might be hidden beneath the surface of stories we thought we understood? What traditional wisdom might be preserved in characters we've dismissed as merely entertaining? But perhaps the most profound consequence lies in what this revelation tells us about Disney's respect for the cultures they drew from. Rather than simplifying or westernizing African spiritual concepts, they appear to have gone to extraordinary lengths to include authentic practices in largely unaltered form. What if this wasn't accidental but intentional? What if certain creators at Disney recognized the value of these traditions and deliberately included them in their most authentic form possible within the constraints of family animation? If so, this raises questions about who might have advocated for this authenticity during the creative process. Which researchers, consultants, or creators might have ensured these specific details were included? What debates might have occurred about how explicitly to present these spiritual elements? The answers may never be known, but the evidence of their work remains embedded in the films, awaiting viewers with the knowledge to recognize what they're really seeing. What about the second hidden layer of Rafiki's character that almost no one has noticed? Throughout the films, subtle clues suggest Rafiki isn't just maintaining spiritual traditions. He's actively preparing for their continuation. Watch carefully how Rafiki interacts with the royal family across generations. With Mufasa, he serves as advisor and spiritual officiant. With Simba, he becomes active guide and spiritual teacher. With Kiara and Kovu, he increasingly moves to the background, observing and occasionally facilitating rather than directly intervening. This progression mirrors how traditional spiritual knowledge is transmitted across generations. The practitioner first demonstrates, then guides the initiate to perform aspects of the practice, and finally observes as the initiate develops their own relationship with the spiritual forces involved. Come on, look at how Rafiki's relationship with Simba evolves across the films. He begins by performing rituals for him, progresses to guiding him through spiritual experiences, and eventually watches approvingly as Simba develops his own spiritual awareness. This isn't just character development, it's a traditional apprenticeship progression. Rafiki isn't just helping Simba become king, he's preparing him to eventually become the next spiritual guardian of the Pride Lands. This revelation transforms our understanding of Simba's character arc. His journey isn't just about political leadership, but spiritual development. Learning to serve as proper conduit between the ancestral realm and the physical world of the Pride Lands. The famous "Remember Who You Are" sequence takes on new significance when viewed through this lens. It's not just about Simba reclaiming his royal identity, but awakening to his spiritual heritage and responsibilities. Rafiki isn't just helping Simba become king. He's initiating him into a specific spiritual lineage. What if the true circle of life includes the succession of spiritual guardians as well as kings? This would explain why Rafiki seems increasingly content to observe rather than intervene as the films progress. He's witnessing the successful transmission of his spiritual knowledge to the next generation. The evidence for this interpretation appears most clearly in how Rafiki's behavior changes across films. In the original, he actively performs rituals and spiritual interventions. In the sequels, he increasingly guides others to perform these functions themselves while he watches from a distance. This mirrors traditional patterns of knowledge transmission, where the elder practitioner gradually steps back as the initiate develops their own relationship with the spiritual forces involved. The goal isn't dependency, but eventual autonomy. Let's face it, this adds an entirely new dimension to films we thought we understood. Beneath the surface narrative of royal succession lies a parallel story of spiritual succession, the preparation of the next generation to maintain the cosmic balance of the Pride Lands. This dimension transforms even the most familiar scenes. The opening circle of life sequence isn't just establishing the setting, but demonstrating the spiritual ecosystem Rafiki maintains through his practices. Mufasa's lessons to Simba aren't just about kingship, but spiritual responsibility. Even Scar's reign takes on deeper significance, representing not just political usurpation, but spiritual disruption. His failure to undergo proper ceremonial preparation and maintain ritual connections with ancestral forces directly causes the physical deterioration of the Pride Lands. What if every major plot point in the films has this dual nature, simultaneously political and spiritual? Simba's exile isn't just escape from physical threat, but spiritual alienation that must be healed through proper ritual. His return isn't just political reclamation, but spiritual restoration. This interpretation aligns perfectly with how many traditional African societies understand leadership, not as separate political and spiritual roles, but as integrated functions where proper governance requires correct spiritual maintenance through ritual. What does this reveal about how we should approach these beloved films going forward? Every scene featuring Rafiki contains layers of meaning that transform our understanding of the entire narrative. His apparently random behaviors are actually precise spiritual techniques with specific purposes. The eccentric baboon we've laughed at for decades might actually be performing some of the most authentic representations of African spirituality ever depicted in mainstream Western media. And he may be secretly training Simba to eventually take on this spiritual mantle. Next time you watch any of the Lion King films, observe Rafiki's actions with new awareness. Notice the precise hand positions, the specific ritual sequences, the careful use of natural elements. These aren't random animations, but deliberate representations of authentic spiritual practices. What if these films you've watched since childhood contain depths you never imagined? What if, beneath the entertaining surface, Disney embedded authentic spiritual wisdom drawn from traditions largely unknown to Western audiences? The colorful baboon you dismissed as comic relief might actually be one of the most authentic spiritual practitioners ever portrayed in Western animation. And his apparently nonsensical behaviors might be precise ritual techniques drawn from traditions developed over centuries. How will you watch these beloved films differently now that you understand what Rafiki is really doing? What new dimensions might you discover in scenes you thought you knew by heart? What authentic spiritual wisdom might now be visible to you that was previously hidden in plain sight? The next time that mandrill appears on screen, singing his seemingly nonsensical songs and performing his apparently random actions, remember, you're not just watching an eccentric character. You're witnessing authentic African spiritual practices performed by a fully realized shaman, maintaining the cosmic balance of an entire ecosystem. What if the wise baboon we've been laughing at for decades has actually been performing authentic spiritual rituals all along, hiding profound traditional wisdom in plain sight within beloved family entertainment?